Welcome to Reaction. I'm Maggie Pagano, Executive Editor, and I'm delighted to be joined by our guest from Berlin today, Steffen Grimberg, who's been reporting, in fact, for the site on Germany's crunch elections. And in fact, Steffen, you sort of got it right, didn't you? You always said it was going to be a very tight race.
Yeah, that was something, Maggie, that was clearly the thing to expect, at least during the past 2 or 3 weeks. We had this, you might say, resurrection of the Social Democrats under Olaf Scholz. However, it was quite clear that although Armin Laschet, the CDU candidate, wasn't cutting such a great figure, the party would still wouldn't lose that much, that the SPD lead would be more than it is at the moment, something like 1.5%.
So explain to us a little bit, because you have proportional representation. And at the moment, the SPD have about 25% of the vote, and the CDU about sort of 24%. Now, over the past 8 years, you've then had a coalition in the center. But what the SPD is saying, that they won't do that this time, but will probably try and form an alliance. And you've got lovely colors for all of these names for the colors, but maybe with the Liberal Party and maybe the Greens. Well, what do you think would be the most likely outcome, Steffen?
Well, the big change is that we are going to see the very first three-party coalition government in Germany. As you mentioned quite rightly, we're quite used to coalition governments as we have proportional representation. In fact, it was only during the 1950s and 1960s, to my knowledge, that there really was a one-party government under Konrad Adenauer, the founding chancellor of the Federal Republic, really. So we're quite used to having two-party coalitions, but it's definitely going to be three parties now, because there is only one version with a grand coalition again, as you mentioned, SPD and CDU joining the ranks, and both have said that that is something they don't want to do again, because for the past 8 years, Germany has been governed by a grand coalition, and especially the Social Democrats were clearly suffering from that, as they were the junior partner, and they now having a small lead over the CDU and its Bavarian sister party, the CSU. They really want to be in the driving seat. And the most likely outcome at the moment, I would imagine, is what we call a traffic light coalition. That would be red for the Social Democrats, yellow for the free market liberals, and green for the environmentally friendly Green Party. And the yellow and the green are going to clash quite considerably over the next couple of weeks in trying to thrash out a compromise how they might govern together, really.
Yeah.
However, the other possibility would be what we call the Jamaica coalition, due to the colors in the Jamaican flag. That would be the CDU, in fact, then as black, again, with the yellow Free Democrats and the Greens.
If it was to be Social Democrats, if Olaf Scholz is going to try and put together that alliance, the Greens, which did not get as many votes as people had been anticipating, it's about 15%, isn't it? To get their support, to get their support, will he not have to shift policy quite substantially? Because, for example, they don't want to do Nord Stream, they want a much more a greener policy. You know, that would they hold him to task over that? Would that be a bargaining chip, or do you think they're so desperate to be in power that they would give in?
I think it would definitely be a bargaining chip, so they wouldn't come lightly and at no cost to the SPD. But I think it will be much easier to get a compromise between Olaf Scholz and Annalena Baerbock, the Green candidate, and her party, than between the Free Democrats and the Greens. The Social Democrats are in a way rather pro-state, like state-driven economy policy, and less free market than the Free Democrats. And so, especially with climate change and other big issues concerning industry and the economy. I think the bigger difference will be between, if it comes to a traffic light coalition, between the junior partners in that coalition, the Greens and the Free Democrats, which might suit Scholz quite nicely, because he has always been the pragmatist, trying to make compromise possible and to combine different forces to his advantage.
Mm. I suppose the big question, that the elephant in the room, as we like to say, is why did the CDU do so badly? Supposedly Merkel was this great heroine, Mutti of the nation, although there's been a lot more criticism about her recently, which I'd like to ask you about too. But why did they do so badly? Did they choose the wrong leader in Armin Laschet?
At least for, let's say, half of the CDU fold, I would say a definite yes. Laschet hails from the, you can't call it the left wing, but the more liberal, the more pragmatic, the not so Catholic, conservative wing of the CDU. He's been running Germany's biggest state, North Rhine-Westphalia, quite successfully. And it was even a surprise that he won that state at the last elections and snatched it away from the Social Democrats, who are normally perceived as the rulers of North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany. So he did quite well there, but perhaps this trying to become chancellor was a bit too much for him, especially following in the footsteps after 16 years of Angela Merkel, as you've said quite rightly, is revered all through the world in a way. Although now with the corona pandemic, this glow has or this shine has taken some scratches over the past year or so, but still she's the very, very important, the very powerful woman in the CDU. And it was also kind of she not supporting Laschet enough, at least according to his supporters within the CDU, which might also explain why he fared not that well as earlier polls suggested. And then there was a big, I wouldn't call it a mistake, because from polls at that time earlier this summer, nobody had the SPD and Olaf Scholz on their cards. Everybody had a thriving Green Party, which polled something like 20% of the vote, according to quite good surveys. And so Laschet was opting for a black and green coalition, which is something he would quite like to do, even now, although he of course needs the Free Democrats to get enough seats in the Bundestag. But that again also alienated him from some of the more conservative party fold, especially also from his Bavarian sister party, the CSU, which is not too keen on the Greens.
Yeah. And do you think that perhaps the CDU could have allowed Markus Söder, leader of the CSU, to have been their candidate? I mean, it's a very odd system that you have, but that would have been possible, wouldn't it, to have had, of course, him as the leader, but the CDU still being the larger party. Do you think that was a mistake? He's a far more charismatic man, certainly from here, from what we can see about him.
He definitely is, Maggie. However, he would have alienated even more people within the normal CDU, I would say. Okay. I think the more likely candidate who might have turned the tide would have been Friedrich Merz, who is the arch-conservative, very industry-friendly. He's an entrepreneur by himself, by trade. And he was running against Laschet for the party chairmanship and narrowly lost that earlier this year. And then he's always been in the wings of the party, tried to even get into Angela Merkel's last government now as finance minister or minister for the economy, which she said no to. And so I would say not Söder would have been the better choice for a more conservative CDU fold, but Merz.
Okay. So, Steffen, can you describe to us what actually happens now? What's going to happen in the Bundestag? Angela Merkel stays Chancellor until you can put the alliance together. Is it a matter, I mean, the CDU and the Social Democrats, the larger party, but what you're saying, it's still conceivable that the CDU could put together, if the Greens or the Liberals or both say, yeah, we'll back you. So, I mean, is this a juggling act? How does it, do they all sit in rooms? Is it like a Borgen? You know, you've seen the wonderful series where they trade. Tell us what will happen.
We all had this in 2017 at the last general election, when Jamaica was on the cards already. And the FDP then, after 2 months of negotiations, marched away with this famous quote by their leader, Christian Lindner, saying it's better not to govern than to govern falsely, or to govern with the wrong perspective. Because he said the differences with the Greens are too big and too large to overcome, which of course is quite interesting, as we are now in the same situation. And just reminding you, in 2017 it took almost half a year before it eventually then was a grand coalition under Angela Merkel again, because they really had no other choice and no other option. But I'm quite confident that this won't happen again, because everybody knows that both the big parties, both the CDU and the SPD, would suffer even more if they had to return to a grand coalition government. What's now going on to happen is that all parties will have preliminary talks with each other, except for the right-wing AfD. All other parties have said that they won't negotiate with them. And also the left party, which is, well, not as bad or as extreme as the AfD, but is to the left of the SPD. They narrowly managed to get into the Bundestag by the skin of their teeth, literally. So they won't play any big role there. All the others will now enter preliminary talks, and both the Greens and the Free Democrats have announced something quite interestingly. They said, well, it doesn't make sense to talk right now with the SPD or the CDU-CSU union about a coalition government, but we have to get our act together first. So what we expect to see now are, of course, behind closed doors, discussions between the FDP and the Greens, trying to see whether they can overcome their big differences and the huge gaps that remain in certain policy areas. Reminding you just that they're quite close on things like immigration, on foreign policy, on, let's say, the not business side of liberal politics. Right. But there are huge differences when it comes to the economy and, of course, taxation. The Greens say we have to battle climate change, and we are going to do whatever it needs, including rising taxes, which is something the FDP is completely against.
Absolutely. Wow, that's going to be fascinating. From a domestic perspective, will there, if either of these two, Jamaica or traffic lights, take power, will you see much change in domestic policies, and will we, as a friend and neighbour, no longer member of EU, but still great friends and neighbours, will we see much difference, do you think, from either coalition being in the driving seat?
Well, you will see some difference. You won't see that much difference that you would have perhaps seen if the election had a clear outcome with the desired coalition by Olaf Scholz, which would have been red-green only. Yeah. So the FDP might put some, let's say, sand into the entire operation there. However, you will see a much more greenish operation when it goes to traffic light, I'd say. And I'm not really convinced that entering a Jamaica coalition at national level would be a very good idea for the Greens, because they would alienate, I'd say, 2/3 to 3/4 of their supporting community, who are clearly against most of at least the economic policies that the FDP stands for.
Why do you think they did so much less well than predictions had shown?
I think that's something that runs with the German mind or psyche, you might say. If an election is a long time off, people think big and say, oh, we're going to really, we need change and we're going to vote for change. But when election day gets closer and you really have to make up your mind what you are actually voting for, and of course think about what might happen and how that might affect your personal lifestyle, let's say, people get more cautious. So I think this rather flamboyant, let's change very much attitude of early summer, when the Greens polled over 20% of the vote, and at one time we're even at least from that date the largest party, or would have taken the #1 spot even before the CDU and the SPD. People got more cautious and then voted, perhaps not so much with their hearts, but with perhaps their wallets and certain risk-averse attitudes. Plus, Annalena Baerbock clearly stumbled a little bit, not as much as Armin Laschet during campaigning, but still she gave reason for a lot of criticism. And as she wasn't that politics savvy, I mean, she's a relative newcomer to the scene. She has never held office in any state. She really had some tough times navigating all these criticisms and small scandals that especially the other parties tried to get her into.
Sure. Now, there was one very positive outcome, wasn't there? And that is that the AFD didn't do anywhere near as well, just under 5%. I mean, that must have been quite a relief, do you think?
Well, the AFD, just to correct you there, is not, that's the left party, which is under 5%. The AFD has a solid 11 point something percent, I believe. So yes, they're back in the Bundestag. Everybody expected that, and they're very strong in the East, especially in the state of Saxony. However, in the Western states, there were some significant losses. And by and large, you're absolutely correct. This election was fought on center ground. That doesn't mean things won't get complicated now, but at least we haven't seen any shift towards either leftist or right-wing extremes as some people had feared a couple of weeks, a month ago.
Fascinating, Stefan. A final question. Why has it been that Merkel's shine, as you said earlier, has slightly evaporated? Was it like most leaders during coronavirus, people start questioning strategy, or is it more general? As she's coming to the end, you can afford to perhaps be more critical. What is it?
Well, the one thing is, if you've been in office for 16 years, I mean, she's the longest reigning chancellor Germany ever had. And we've had some pretty long reigning chancellors like Konrad Adenauer and Helmut Kohl, obviously. You won't be as fresh and as concise as you were perhaps during your first or second term in office. And then it was the pandemic. I mean, Merkel's entire political style is a very cautious and not so much action-prone, but reaction-prone process. And with the pandemic, people saw that she was really driven by developments that were clearly not under her control. And she wasn't really successful in hiding her own helplessness sometimes. I mean, she admitted having made mistakes. You might remember this Easter, she tried to introduce a special Easter break in order to break the third COVID wave, which was thrown out by even her own party colleagues. And so she with this reaction-prone a politics of hers, she really came to the end of her wits in a way, because you can't handle a pandemic like that. You have to take decisions, even if they turn out to be wrong. And so she was seen as too hesitant, trying to get everyone together, all the 16 leaders of Germany's 16 states, which was really always meant that you had a very, very narrow compromise band, which then clearly didn't convince people that this was really leadership.
That's interesting, because I remember going back to last March in 2020, actually most of Europe was looking to Germany because you were handling it so well. And that was mainly a function of your regional governments and regional health centers, wasn't it? Able to collect
absolutely. But also that wasn't enough in the end. And it was clear that we needed a national strategy. And even now we have this situation that there are conflicting rules and regulations in most states. So if you're traveling with a German railway, they once had this rule that the rules of the state you were traveling through would apply, which of course was utter nonsense. So they are doing their own regulations these days. But still, it's very complicated. I think in such a dire situation, most people would like clear rules where they don't have to think about, do I have to wear a mask here? Can I leave it there? Do I have, we call it 2 or 3G, if you're either tested or have been vaccinated or have had COVID and have recovered. If it's 2 or 3 of the Gs, this is all very, very, well, still.
What is the G? Is the G for vaccination?
The G is either for vaccination, that's geimpft in German.
Okay.
Then the G is also for recovered from COVID, genesen, it is in German. And the third is getested, which means tested.
Okay, so what G are you?
I'm vaccinated.
Yeah, so you're a 1G or 2G?
Well, I would go for the I would qualify for both 3G and 2G. But the big question at the moment with Corona in Germany is if tests should be okay. We, as you're aware, we have a problem here that, especially in the East, there is some opposition to vaccination, and the administration is now trying to do away with free tests so that people have to pay for them, with a hope that this will encourage more people to get vaccinated.
Wow. Fascinating. Steffen, that was really interesting. Thank you so much. Maybe we can talk again soon and you can...
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, be great. So just quickly, traffic lights or Jamaica? I think you're traffic lights.
I would say 75% traffic lights, yeah.
Okay, lovely. We'll meet in a few weeks and we can see, or maybe months.
Prove me wrong, I'd be delighted to talk about it.
Sounds like it to me. Thank you so much.